I knew something was wrong the moment my brother-in-law raised his glass. His smile looked perfect, but his hand trembled ever so slightly. I had seen that look before years ago on men carrying secrets that could get others killed. That single detail changed everything. It was the night my family discovered I was not who they thought I was. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. And share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It is always moving to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. Most families see only what they want to see. Mine saw me as the quiet one, the invisible sister who never quite measured up. At gatherings, I was the woman at the edge of the room, sipping water, nodding politely, fading into the background. They never asked about the years I disappeared, the long stretches of silence, or the things I carried home in the corners of my mind. It was easier for them to believe I had done nothing worth speaking of, and I let them believe it. That night was meant to be a celebration. The house glowed with pride as my brother-in-law Daniel was honored for his new promotion. He looked every inch the rising officer, tall, polished, shaking hands with the confidence of a man used to applause. My sister beamed at his side. Guests told stories about deployments and medals. The air was heavy with admiration, with the kind of reverence people reserve for men in uniform. I sat quietly, listening, observing as I always do. That was when a guest made an offhand comment about missing supply shipments. Laughter followed, jokes about bureaucracy and red tape. Nothing remarkable. But Daniel's hand froze on his glass just for an instant, then his jaw tightened. His eyes darted too quickly toward the floor before he forced another smile. No one else noticed. I did. It was a small thing, a flicker no longer than a heartbeat. But to me it was a warning bell. My training had taught me that the body never lies. I had spent years in rooms where lives depended on noticing the slightest change, the smallest tremor. I knew what I had seen, and it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself it could be nothing, old habits, an overactive mind. But as the evening went on, as Daniel soaked in the praise and admiration of the room, I could not shake the image of that tremor. My family thought I was nothing more than a quiet bystander. What they did not know was that silence had once been my weapon. And that night, it told me my brother-in-law was hiding something dangerous. That was the moment when the story truly began. The party was already loud by the time I stepped inside. The kind of loud that drowns out the sound of your own thoughts. Glasses clinked together, voices overlapped, laughter echoed across polished wood floors. I could smell the sweet burn of whiskey, the faint tang of cigar smoke clinging to jackets, perfume too heavy for a crowded room. It was a celebration, after all. A promotion deserved nothing less. I found my place near the edge, as I always did. I slipped into a chair close enough to be polite, far enough to stay unnoticed. I smiled when eyes glanced my way, nodded when someone said my name, kept my glass of water steady in my hand. People like me, the quiet ones, learn how to fade without disappearing. We learn to take up space without drawing a spotlight. My sister moved through the crowd with the glow of a woman who believed in her husband. Daniel looked every bit the rising star that night. His uniform was crisp, the fabric catching the light like armor. He shook hands with generals and laughed at old war stories told for the 100th time. Guests clapped him on the back, telling him he deserved this honor, that he was destined for more. He smiled in all the right places, spoke with the ease of someone used to admiration. From my corner I watched. That is what I have always done best. Watching without interrupting. Listening without adding my voice. My family calls it silence, but I have always thought of it as something sharper. Silence is a scalpel. It cuts through the noise, it lets you see what others cannot. As the night wore on, the speeches began. Toast to Daniel's future, to his leadership, to his promise as an officer. He lifted his glass and let the praise wash over him. My sister's eyes glistened with pride. Around me people leaned in, eager to be close to his shine. Someone mentioned the backlog of supplies, a joke about red tape and missing shipments. The room erupted in laughter. Everyone had a story about military logistics gone wrong, but Daniel's hand froze for the briefest second. His glass trembled. His jaw tightened, the smile faltered before it snapped back into place. No one else noticed, or maybe they chose not to, but I did, because once upon a time I had been trained to see what others missed. It was only a flicker, no longer than a heartbeat, but it pulled me out of the background like a sharp tug on invisible strings. I had seen that look before. In forward operating bases, in backrooms where information could cost lives. It was the look of someone guarding a truth they could not afford to let slip. I set my glass down carefully, steady as stone. Around me the laughter carried on, oblivious. But inside me something had shifted. My family thought I was invisible, yet in that moment I saw more than all of them combined. When you hear me describe this, you might wonder, have you ever been in a room full of people who thought they knew you, while you were carrying a whole different life inside? If you have, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me. Those stories remind us we are never as alone as we think. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was nerves, the pressure of being celebrated, the weight of expectation. But deep down I knew better. The body never lies, not when the stakes are this high. So I sat there still as glass, watching my brother-in-law laugh and charm and accept his praise. But I could not unsee that tremor. And I knew, though I did not yet know how, that my quiet place in the corner was about to vanish. I stayed in my corner long after the laughter about missing shipments had died down. The conversations flowed easily again. People drifted from one circle to another, plates of hors d'oeuvres balancing in their hands, glasses refilled before they were half empty. It was a scene I had witnessed too many times, though never quite like this. Tonight everything shimmered on the surface, but underneath I could feel a current pulling in another direction. Daniel was at the center, as he always was. He had the natural gravity of a man born to be admired. My sister's hand rested proudly on his arm, her smile wide enough to stretch across the room. They were the golden couple, the ones everyone expected to go far to make our family proud. And then there was me, the afterthought, the quiet one, the sister who never quite measured up. I could hear the whispers that were not meant to sting but always did. Relatives talking about careers, children, promotions, houses bought and sold. And then the pause when my name came up, followed by a polite shrug. She keeps to herself, she never really did much, at least she shows up for family dinners. What they never understood was that my silence was not emptiness, it was a shield. I had learned long ago that speaking too much meant giving away pieces of yourself, pieces better kept hidden. They thought I was boring. In truth, I was simply careful. Still, it cut deeper than I cared to admit. Sitting there in my corner, listening to Daniel celebrated as a man of integrity, I felt the familiar ache of being unseen. And yet that tremor in his hand told me I saw him more clearly than anyone else in the room. Do you know what it feels like to carry something your family cannot imagine? To let them believe you are ordinary because the truth would tear them apart. If you do, share a piece of it in the comments. Your story might echo someone else's silence, and that connection can be powerful. I let my eyes travel around the room. The veterans swapped stories about deployments, some of them exaggerated into near fiction. Wives compared notes on children's schools and upcoming moves. Old friends clapped Daniel on the back, their laughter a little too loud, their admiration bordering on envy. In me, I simply watched, every detail sliding into place like a puzzle I had been solving for years. It was not only Daniel's tremor. It was the way his laugh came half a second too late when the jokes turned to supply shortages. The way he shifted his weight when anyone mentioned equipment in the field. To anyone else, meaningless. To me, red flags waving in the air. I thought about the soldiers who depended on those shipments. Boots, armor, medical supplies, food. Small things that made the difference between life and death. My mind flashed back to a desert outpost years ago, a place where the water shipment was delayed by days. I remembered the cracks in lips, the dizzy spells, the way morale crumbled faster than the body. Supplies were never just supplies, they were survival. And now, here in this glittering room filled with laughter, I wondered what Daniel had to do with the missing shipments. My stomach tightened. The air felt too warm. I forced myself to sip water to keep my hands steady to stay invisible just a little longer. The speeches ended. Music swelled from speakers tucked into corners. Couples drifted to the dance floor. My sister pulled Daniel close, her eyes shining as though she had won the lottery. I felt a hollow space open inside me. Pride for her happiness sat heavy alongside the dread blooming in my chest. That is the thing about family. They can make you feel both love and isolation in the very same breath. I thought about leaving early, slipping out into the cool night, letting the silence of my small apartment swallow me whole. But something kept me rooted in my chair. Perhaps it was that flicker of his hand, burned into my mind like a warning flare. Or perhaps it was the stubborn part of me that refused to walk away when the truth was within reach. My sister's laugh rang out across the room. Daniel whispered something in her ear, and she blushed like a girl again. The crowd around them cheered. No one would have believed that just minutes earlier, I had seen something that cracked the perfect glass of their world. It would have been easier to ignore, to push it aside, chalk it up to nerves or imagination. But I could not, because I had once sworn an oath, and though I no longer wore the uniform, some promises live under your skin forever. I leaned back, let the shadows hold me, and whispered to myself so softly no one could hear. I saw you. I know what that look means, and I will not forget. When you hear this part, tell me, have you ever noticed something small, a detail no one else caught, and it changed how you saw everything? It could be at work, at home, anywhere. Share it if you feel like it. Stories like that remind us that attention, even the quiet kind, has power. The night dragged on. Eventually, I stood to help in the kitchen, carrying empty glasses, stacking plates. It gave me an excuse to move, to breathe away from the crowd. But even there, with my hands busy, my thoughts circled back to Daniel's trembling hand. It was a thread, thin but strong, and I knew pulling it would unravel more than just his perfect image. Later, as guests began to leave, I stood at the door beside my sister. She hugged me tightly, thanked me for coming. Daniel gave me a nod, the polite kind reserved for in-laws. His eyes flicked over me without recognition, as though I were truly the invisible woman they all believed. But I carried something now that none of them did, a secret or the beginning of one. When I finally stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me like a cold truth. The stars were bright, sharp against the dark. I walked slowly to my car, every step echoing with the knowledge that nothing would ever look the same again. And that was how it began. Not with a grand revelation, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a single tremor in a glass raised for a toast. The smallest crack in a perfect surface. A detail only I had noticed. A detail that would change everything. That night I returned home and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I replayed the moment again and again, the tremor, the jaw, the eyes that did not match the smile. I thought about how easy it would be to dismiss it, to stay the quiet sister who never challenged the family story. But silence, once a shield, can also become a cage. And I had no intention of being caged again. If you are still listening, I wonder, do you believe that family loyalty should outweigh the truth, or that the truth should stand no matter the cost? Leave a comment and tell me where you stand. There is no right or wrong, only the stories we live by. That night marked the first fracture. The first sign that the golden image of our family's rising star was not what it seemed. I did not yet know where it would lead, but I knew one thing with certainty. I had been invisible for too long. And now, the silence that had once protected me would become the very thing that set the truth free. The night after Daniel's party, I barely slept. I sat in my kitchen long past midnight, a single lamp throwing light across the table. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I had my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing, yet replaying everything. His hand trembling on the glass, his jaw tightening, the way his eyes slipped sideways. Those details may have seemed meaningless to anyone else. To me, they were everything. They were the language I had lived in for years. A language that never used words but spoke louder than any voice. I had not planned to walk back into those memories, but sometimes the past does not ask for permission. It comes crashing back the moment it recognizes itself in the present. I first learned the weight of silence in training. Back then, I was one of only a handful of women in my unit, a newly minted intelligence officer trying to prove I belonged. The classroom was filled with men who had already served combat tours, men with scars across their skin and stories heavy on their shoulders. They looked at me as if I had wandered into the wrong building. The instructors gave us drills that pushed the limits of patience. Hours of surveillance footage, nothing happening until it did. We were told to watch every flicker of a hand, every blink too slow, every step too careful. Most of the class dozed off, lulled by the monotony. I stayed awake. I wrote notes no one else bothered to. I drew patterns in silence. And slowly the instructors began to notice. One night during a training op, I caught it before anyone else. A figure on the screen moved like he belonged, uniform pressed, face calm. But the weight on his right heel was wrong. He carried himself like a man expecting to flee. I tapped my pen against the desk. 3 quick strikes, our signal for a breach in the pattern. 15 minutes later, the perimeter lit up with explosions meant to trap us. But we had already moved. No casualties. That night they gave me a name. A Sierra, the hidden one. I did not choose it, but it stuck because I was not the loudest or the strongest. I was the one who saw what others missed. When I look back now, I realize how much that identity shaped me. Silence was no longer something forced on me. It became my weapon, my armor. In the field, no one mocked me for fading into the background. They relied on it. Have you ever been underestimated, only to find that the very thing people dismissed was the thing that saved you? If you have, share it in the comments. Stories like that remind others not to measure worth by volume. Years later, after I had already carried the weight of multiple missions, came the night that proved the power of silence more than any other. It was not a battlefield. It was not a firefight. It was a ballroom lit by chandeliers, a diplomatic reception meant to look harmless. But sometimes danger wears a tuxedo and smiles through a glass of wine. That assignment was not supposed to be remarkable. I was there as a liaison, a woman in a simple dress with a badge that gave me clearance but no spotlight. My job was to observe, to remain unnoticed in the corner while ambassadors toasted peace that everyone knew was paper thin. The music was soft, violins rising above the hum of conversation. Waiters glided with trays of champagne. Dignitaries laughed, their gestures too large, their smiles too polished. I stayed in the corner as I always did, watching, noticing. At first everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. A rhythm too smooth, like a song rehearsed too many times. That was when I heard it. A radio click, but wrong. 2 quick taps instead of 1. My eyes drifted to the man in uniform, his gaze fixed too intently on the balcony above. I moved slowly, weaving through the crowd without drawing attention. I reached my commander, an old Navy SEAL with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. I leaned close, whispered only 6 words. Do not drink from your glass. He did not question. He never did. He smashed the glass against the wall. Chaos rippled. Security swarmed. Within minutes, they uncovered a foreign agent disguised as a caterer, wine laced with poison, a plan meant to end negotiations in silence. The news the next day called it a diplomatic misstep. They never mentioned the woman in the corner. They never do. But in that moment, my commander looked at me differently. Not with applause, not with dramatic praise, but with a single nod. And that nod meant more than any medal ever could. That night cemented what I already knew. Silence is not weakness. It is precision. It is the blade you never see coming. Sitting in my kitchen years later, remembering Daniel's hand trembling on the stem of his glass, I realized why it unsettled me so deeply. Because I had seen that exact tremor before. In men about to make a choice that would destroy them. In agents balancing the weight of lies too heavy to hold. It is a strange kind of loneliness to notice what others ignore. To feel the ground shift while everyone else keeps dancing. If you have ever carried a truth alone, one that no one else could see or wanted to see, you know that loneliness. Tell me in the comments if you understand that feeling. Sometimes sharing it makes the burden lighter. After the ballroom mission, life returned to the gray rhythm that intelligence work often carried. There were no headlines with my name, no ribbons or medals handed to me in front of cheering crowds. I went back to my desk, back to files stacked high, back to the endless scanning of faces on screens that blurred together until one detail broke through. That was the way of it. Quiet victories, invisible wars. At first, I thought I could carry them lightly. That anonymity was a gift. Better to be unseen than to paint a target on my back. But with each mission, with each nod from commanders who never said my name out loud, the weight grew. Silence protected me, but it also hollowed me out. There were nights I stared at my reflection and wondered if I still belonged to the same world as everyone else. My family thought I was just another woman working behind a desk somewhere. They laughed about me alphabetizing files, made jokes about how I probably never touched a weapon. I let them laugh. It was easier. But the truth was that while they joked, I was memorizing the tremor of a man's jaw halfway across the world, sending signals that saved lives before anyone else noticed danger was at the door. Sometimes I wanted to scream it, to tell them who I really was. But that was not the job. The job was to keep the secret. And so I stayed silent. Have you ever carried an achievement, something that mattered deeply, but you could never tell the people closest to you? If you have, leave a note in the comments. You never know who else might be holding that same quiet weight. Years slipped past. Missions blurred together. Some were small, some were life-altering. But the lesson remained the same. The world rarely sees the ones who keep it from falling apart. We are shadows in the corner, steady hands that notice what others ignore. Eventually, I walked away. I told myself I was tired, that it was time to find another life. But if I am honest, I think I was afraid of losing myself completely in the silence. Too long in the shadows and you begin to forget where you end and the darkness begins. So I turned in my badge, folded up the uniform, and became Mia again. I tried to live quietly, simply, invisibly. My family thought it suited me. They believed I had never been anything more than what they saw at Sunday dinners. They believed my silence meant emptiness. I never corrected them until Daniel's party. When I saw his hand tremble, it was as if the years between disappeared. The ballroom, the poisoned wine, the man on the balcony, they all came rushing back. That same language of silence, that same betrayal written in the smallest movement. My family saw nothing. They saw only the shine of his medals, the glow of his promotion. But I saw the crack in the glass. I wanted to believe it was nothing. That perhaps my training made me paranoid. That I was seeing ghosts in a man simply nervous at being celebrated. I tried to dismiss it. But deep down I knew better. The body never lies. And once you have lived in a world where noticing details saves lives, you cannot return to ignorance. Later that night, when the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, I sat with my sister in the kitchen. She was still radiant, humming as she rinsed glasses. She spoke of Daniel's future, of the doors this promotion would open, of how proud she was. I smiled, nodded, played the role of the supportive sister. But inside, a storm churned. I studied her face, her joy, the trust she carried in her voice. She believed her husband to be a man of honor, a man who would never falter. And maybe he was once. But what I had seen told me something else, a man hiding a secret that could cost more than just his reputation. I went home that night and lay awake until dawn. I replayed every moment. The tremor, the glance, the pause in his laughter. Small things, yes, but small things are what I had lived on for years. They were never small to me. If you are listening now, let me ask you, do you trust your instincts even when no one else sees what you see? Or do you silence yourself, afraid of being wrong? Share your thoughts. Sometimes the line between paranoia and intuition is thin, and yet it can change everything. By morning, I knew I could not ignore it. My life in the shadows was supposed to be over, but it had followed me home. The skills I thought I had set aside were alive, sharp as ever, and they told me Daniel was not simply the golden officer my family believed him to be. I told myself I would watch, just watch. No action yet, no confrontation. Silence had always been my strength. I would let it serve me again. But I also knew what that meant. Once silence begins to cut, it does not stop until it finds the truth. And so it began, the watching, the remembering. The long nights where the past and present blurred together, and I realized I had not left the shadows at all. I had only been waiting for the moment they would call me back. That is how I returned unwillingly to the world I thought I had left behind. Not through choice, not through desire, but because silence does not let you walk away once it has claimed you. Daniel's hand, his eyes, his pause, they were the summons, and I could not unhear them. As I sat alone that morning, a coffee cooling in my hand, I whispered to myself the same words I had once spoken before stepping into a mission. Stay awake, watch, listen, because the truth is always there waiting for someone willing to see it. It was a Sunday evening when the next crack appeared. The kind of evening our family called ordinary. My sister insisted on hosting dinner once a month, a tradition meant to keep us close, though in truth it often felt like a performance. The table was long, crowded with roast chicken, potatoes, salads, and laughter that tried too hard. Children darted in and out of the room. Adults sipped wine and argued about sports. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual. I sat at my usual place near the end, carving out a quiet corner where I could watch without being watched. Daniel was in his element, telling stories, making people laugh, his voice carrying over the clatter of plates. He thrived on admiration, and my family offered it freely. At one point, my cousin mentioned her husband's unit. She spoke of the delays they had been facing, how equipment had not arrived when it was most needed. It was a throwaway comment, the kind of small frustration families share when loved ones serve far away. But Daniel's reaction caught me like a hook in the chest. He leaned forward, speaking too quickly, too specifically. He explained the exact routes those shipments took, the checkpoints where they might be delayed, even the names of contractors involved. His tone was casual, almost helpful, but I knew better. An officer at his level should not have had access to that level of detail, especially not about shipments he was not directly overseeing. The table moved on, no one noticing the precision of his words, but I sat frozen. My fork hovered above my plate. My mind raced, pulling on threads only I could see. When dinner ended and dishes were cleared, I excused myself quickly. My sister hugged me, Daniel gave me a distracted smile, and I walked into the cool night air with my heart pounding. The silence outside felt heavier than the noise inside. That night, in the stillness of my apartment, I pulled out old habits I thought I had buried. I logged into the secure archives I still had access to through back channels, remnants of my years in service. My hands moved with muscle memory, pulling up shipment records, contract numbers, dates. I told myself I was only looking for reassurance, for proof that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew I was not. The first pattern appeared quickly. A shipment logged as delivered, but the receiving unit had filed a discrepancy. The inventory numbers did not match. Helmets and vests marked as received never reached the men on the ground. I dug deeper. Another record, then another, over and over the same pattern, ghost shipments, approved, signed, cleared on paper, but in reality they vanished. I leaned back, staring at the screen. My stomach turned. Ghost shipments were not just numbers. They meant soldiers standing in the field without the armor promised to them. They meant empty crates where there should have been protection. They meant someone was playing a dangerous game with other people's lives. And Daniel had known too much. I thought of my sister's smile at dinner, the way she brushed flour from her apron as she moved between table and kitchen. I thought of my niece tugging at Daniel's sleeve, proud of her father in uniform. They believed him to be a man of honor. But what if the truth was different? I closed the files, my chest tight. I knew better than to jump to conclusions. Evidence mattered. Patterns mattered. I had built a career on not acting until I was certain. But the certainty was building with every click, every page. If you are listening, let me ask you, have you ever uncovered something about someone you love, something that made you question everything you thought you knew? How did you carry it? Share if you are willing. Sometimes the hardest truths are easier to bear when spoken aloud. I spent the next week pretending at normal life. I went to work. I answered texts from my sister. I nodded politely when colleagues spoke of trivial things. But every night I returned to the files. I mapped out shipments against dates, against routes, against Daniel's assignments. I built a web of red strings in my mind, threads connecting places and names, and every thread seemed to circle back toward him, even if his name never appeared directly. That was the mark of someone careful. Someone who knew how to hide in plain sight. He had influence, not signatures. He left no trail in ink, but the echoes of his decisions were there in the gaps, in the missing crates, in the soldiers left exposed. The more I found, the heavier it felt. Each discovery pressed against my chest like a stone. I could not share it with anyone, not even my closest friends. To speak of it too soon would put everything at risk. And so, once again, I carried it in silence. There is a peculiar kind of pain in realizing that silence can both protect and imprison you. If you understand that, you know how heavy it is. Leave a thought in the comments if this speaks to you. It is always powerful to see how many of us live behind quiet walls. One evening, I printed a handful of records and laid them out on my kitchen table. Papers stretched across the wood, lines of numbers, signatures, codes. I traced them with my finger, circling dates that lined up too neatly, approval codes that mirrored each other too often. I whispered to myself, steady and low, "This is not chance. This is deliberate." The room felt colder. My skin prickled as though someone was watching, though I was alone. That is the nature of truth. Once uncovered, it changes the air around you. The papers on my kitchen table became a landscape of absence. Numbers crossed each other like tangled roads. Signatures repeated, too neat, too practiced. Dates lined up with uncanny precision. It looked orderly at first glance, but the order itself was the tell. Real life is messy. Logistics is chaos dressed up in paperwork. When the patterns are too perfect, something is being hidden. I circled names I recognized. Contractors Daniel had once mentioned in passing, colleagues who toasted him at parties, men who laughed the loudest at his jokes. Their names appeared on requisition forms, on approvals that moved shipments too quickly, that bypassed the usual checks. Always the same few names, moving through the same channel, but never his. That was what made my stomach twist. Daniel's clearance level gave him the power to shape these routes, but he never signed. He never put his name on the page. Someone else always did the writing. The authorizations, the initials in the margins. He was careful, too careful. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The evidence was enough to draw a map of corruption, but not enough to pin him to the center. Every arrow pointed his way, yet his fingerprints were nowhere. It reminded me of nights in intelligence work when we knew a spy was in the room but could never prove it. You could feel their presence in the way information leaked, in the way outcomes shifted, but the proof stayed just out of reach. The silence itself became a shield. Do you believe silence can be as dangerous as a lie? I wonder what you think. Share it in the comments. Sometimes silence is the loudest confession of all. The days blurred, I went about life as if nothing had changed. Coffee with colleagues, calls with my sister, smiles at family dinners, but underneath my mind raced. I memorized patterns, recited numbers under my breath like scripture. Each night, the papers waited for me, scattered across the table, pulling me back into the shadows I thought I had left behind. One evening, I almost told my sister. We were standing at her sink after dinner, drying dishes while Daniel played with their daughter in the living room. My sister spoke of their future, of the new house they wanted to buy, of how proud she was of his career. The words caught in my throat, heavy and sharp. I wanted to tell her, to shake her shoulders and say he is not who you think he is. But then I heard my niece's laughter, pure and bright, and I stayed silent. Instead, I nodded, forced a smile, and carried the secret back home with me. At night, I dreamed of empty crates, of soldiers reaching for gear that never came, of mothers receiving folded flags instead of sons. I woke with sweat on my skin, the sheets tangled like restraints. The truth was clear. The shipments vanished because someone made them vanish, and Daniel knew far too much. But clarity was not the same as proof. I searched harder, going deeper than I should have. Old channels, encrypted drives, contacts who owed me favors. I pieced together logs from units across continents. The pattern was undeniable. Every time Daniel moved into a new role, ghost shipments increased. Delays multiplied, equipment disappeared, and every time he left a post, the numbers steadied again. Still, his name was absent. It was like chasing a shadow, always there, never tangible. One night, hunched over the table with papers spread wide, I whispered aloud, "You are smart, smarter than I gave you credit for. You let others do the writing. You stay clean while they take the fall." The words tasted bitter. I thought of my sister asleep beside him, believing she was safe. I thought of my niece climbing into his lap, calling him a hero. And I wondered how much longer I could stay silent. If you were me, what would you have done? Would you have told your family, even with nothing but shadows for proof? Leave your thoughts below. I want to know how others weigh loyalty against truth. The following Sunday we gathered again, another dinner, another stage where my family played their parts. I watched Daniel as he carved the roast, his smile wide, his hands steady. No tremor now, he was confident, too confident. As the conversation turned to deployments and shortages, I held my breath. I waited. And there it was again. He slipped just for a moment, offering details no ordinary officer should know. Routes, delays, contractors. His words were too precise, his knowledge too deep. I forced myself to smile, to laugh along with the others. But inside, my decision hardened. I could not ignore this. I could not let the silence cover it any longer. When I returned home that night, I gathered the papers into a neat stack. I slid them into a folder and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. My hands shook as I closed it. The evidence was enough to paint the picture, enough to tell me the truth, but not enough to tear away his mask in front of the world. He had left no signature, no slip of ink that would tie him directly. That was his brilliance, that was his shield. And it left me standing in the shadows once again, holding a truth too heavy to share and too dangerous to ignore. So that is where I found myself, with every piece of evidence pointing to Daniel, but no proof to nail him to the wall. A puzzle nearly complete, except for the one piece missing. The one piece he had guarded so carefully. I knew then what I had always known in the field. The truth was never handed to you. It had to be earned, clawed from silence, carved out of shadows. And Daniel had made one mistake. No one can hide forever, not from me. The folder sat in my drawer like a loaded weapon. I could feel its weight even when I was in another room. Numbers and codes and dates pressed against my chest every time I breathed. I had built the case carefully, each page another nail in Daniel's shining armor. And yet, without his signature, it was still only a shadow. But shadows had power. I had learned that long ago. Every day I lived with the same question pressing against me. If I stayed silent, what would happen to the soldiers waiting on shipments that would never arrive? If I spoke, what would happen to my sister and her daughter? It felt like choosing who lived and who was destroyed. At night, when the house was still, I dreamed of the faces of men I once served with. Some of them were alive because I noticed a twitch of a hand. Others were dead because a shipment never came. I remembered one boy in particular. He was barely 20, freckles scattered across his face, eyes too young for the desert we stood in. The blast hit before he had the chance to dive. The vest he wore was older than it should have been. Later, someone whispered it had been meant to be replaced, but the crates never showed. His name never left me, his mother's tears never left me. I sat up in bed, sweat clinging to my skin, whispering his name into the dark. It was a reminder that silence could kill. Still, the other voice in me argued. The one that saw my sister's smile, the way she leaned into Daniel's arm, the sound of my niece's laughter when she called him daddy. If I exposed him, I would shatter them. I would tear apart their lives, drag them into shame they had never chosen. Could I live with that? That was the knife I carried inside me, cutting both ways. If you have ever faced a choice where both paths meant breaking something you loved, tell me about it. Or tell me how you survived it. Leave it in the comments if you want. Sometimes those stories remind others that impossible choices are never theirs alone. I tried to distract myself. I went running in the mornings, pounding the pavement until my lungs burned. I cooked meals I barely tasted. I read books without remembering a single word, but every quiet moment pulled me back to the folder. One evening, I spread the papers out again. I traced the lines, the dates, the missing crates. And I thought about the boy with freckles. I thought about the vest that failed him. I thought about how Daniel's silence looked so much like guilt. My heart ached with anger, not just at him but at myself, for staying quiet this long, for letting fear of breaking my family outweigh the truth that was breaking soldiers. That night I pulled out an old box from the back of my closet. Inside were mementos from my years in service, a faded patch, a photograph of my unit, a journal with notes scribbled in margins, words written in the sandstorm of war. At the bottom was a folded letter, creased and worn. It was from the mother of the boy who had died. She had written to thank me, though I never understood why. She said I had been kind to him, that he had mentioned me in his last letter home. She said kindness was a gift she would always hold. I read it again and again. My vision blurred, and then I knew. The choice was already made. If I stayed silent, I betrayed not only the boy but every soldier who trusted the system to protect them. If I spoke, I betrayed my sister. But one betrayal carried blood on its hands, the other carried grief. And grief, I had learned, was survivable. Blood was not. The turning point was not loud. It came quietly, like most truths do. A simple thought that would not let me go. Better my sister hates me than another mother bury her son. I gathered the papers into the folder, my hand steady this time. I sealed it with a clip and placed it on the table. It no longer felt like a weight. It felt like clarity. Have you ever come to a decision so heavy, yet the moment you made it, you felt strangely light? Share it if you have. Those are the moments that mark us. I stared at the folder, whispered to myself, tomorrow. The morning after I whispered tomorrow to myself, I woke before the sun rose. The folder sat on the table where I had left it, edges sharp against the wood like a wound waiting to open. I brewed coffee, though I barely tasted it. My hands moved mechanically, folding the papers into a second envelope, layering it with the kind of caution that had kept me alive in the field. Every step was deliberate. There could be no mistakes. I dressed simply, jeans and a jacket. To anyone on the street, I was just another woman starting her day. Inside, I carried the weight of an entire unit's survival, of families I would never meet, of my own family who had no idea how their world was about to break. The drive to the Office of Internal Affairs was quiet. The street still glistened from the night's rain. I parked 2 blocks away, slipping into old habits, checking reflections in windows, scanning corners. Paranoia, some might call it. To me, it was ritual. Inside, the office was sterile. White walls, dull floors, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I handed the envelope to a clerk who barely glanced at me before directing me to sit. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. Years of practice had taught me how to sit in silence when the noise inside me roared. An investigator arrived, his suit too stiff, his eyes too sharp. He led me into a small room, the kind meant to make you feel both safe and trapped. I slid the folder across the table. He opened it, flipping through the pages, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get these?" he asked. I did not flinch. I observed, I compared records. It was all there if you knew where to look. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. He did not ask more. Perhaps he recognized the look in my eyes, the look of someone who had lived too long in shadows. When I walked out of that building, the air felt different. Lighter yet sharp, as if the world knew something had shifted. The envelope no longer belonged to me. The choice no longer belonged to me. I had delivered the truth, and now it would cut where it must. On the drive home, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear for myself, but for my sister. I pictured her face when the news came. I pictured my niece asking questions she should never have to ask. Those images hurt more than any wound I had ever taken in the field. If you are still with me, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a choice that you knew would break someone you love, yet you did it because it was right? If you feel strong enough, share it in the comments. Your story might give courage to someone standing in front of their own impossible choice. 2 days later, the investigation began. I was not present when they came for Daniel, but I knew the exact moment it happened. My phone buzzed with a message from an old contact. A single word, delivered. I sat in silence, staring at the screen. My chest felt hollow, but also steady. The truth had moved beyond me now. It was in their hands. That evening my sister called. Her voice was raw, as if all the air had been pulled from her lungs. "Why?" she asked, not in anger but in despair. "Why would you do this to us?" I closed my eyes, letting the pain wash over me. I thought of soldiers in the field, of empty crates, of the boy with freckles. "Because silence costs lives," I whispered. "Because someone had to." She did not respond. The line went quiet. Then she hung up. I sat in my kitchen long after the call ended. The envelope was gone, but its echo remained. I had done what I knew was right, yet right does not mean painless. For days I carried that silence. People looked at me differently, though most did not know why. Some called me brave, others called me heartless. A few simply stared as if I were a stranger. I did not argue. Everyone has their version of truth. At night I thought of my sister. I thought of her anger, her grief. I thought of my niece who might grow up believing her aunt had ruined their lives. Those thoughts cut deep, sharper than any blade. But deeper still was the knowledge that somewhere soldiers stood in the field with gear that had finally reached them. Somewhere lives were spared because shipments arrived where they were meant to. That was the balance, that was the cost. If you are hearing this now, tell me, do you believe that doing the right thing is worth it, even if it costs you the people you love most? I want to hear your thoughts, because sometimes I still wonder. The weeks passed. Daniel's face appeared in reports, stripped of his titles, his career unraveling in quiet headlines that never reached my family's dinner table. My sister moved in with our parents for a time. We did not speak, but one night she sent me a photo. Just her and her daughter at the park, both smiling faintly, no words, just the picture. I held my phone for a long time, staring at that image. I chose to believe it was her way of saying she understood, even if forgiveness was still far away. In the stillness of that night, I whispered to myself, "You chose, you did not stay silent, and sometimes that has to be enough." So that was the moment. The day I placed the folder on the table and let the truth burn through the silence. It shattered my family. It cost me the trust of the person I loved most. But it saved lives I will never know, soldiers who will never thank me, mothers who will never write me letters of grief. That is the weight of choosing. Sometimes it means standing alone in the wreckage, trusting that the lives saved are worth the love lost. The news came quietly, the way storms sometimes do. No explosions, no headlines screaming his name across the front page. Just a few lines tucked inside official statements. An internal investigation had concluded. Daniel was stripped of his clearance, discharged. His career ended in a whisper. But inside our family, it was not a whisper. It was a quake. My sister stopped calling. When I tried to reach out, she let the phone ring. At gatherings, I felt her absence as loudly as if she had shouted. My parents looked at me differently too, eyes filled with questions they never asked aloud. Some relatives called me courageous, others called me reckless. A few did not bother to hide their disgust. Blood, they said, should matter more than duty. I carried their judgment the way I carried everything, in silence. The truth is, I understood their anger. To them, I was the one who had destroyed the family. To them, Daniel was a husband, a father, a provider. They did not see the ghost shipments. They did not see the empty crates. They did not know the names I whispered into the night, the soldiers who might still be alive because I refused to stay silent. So I let them call me a traitor. Better that than the alternative. If you are listening now, tell me. Have you ever done something you knew was right, but the people closest to you could not see it that way? How did you live with their judgment? Share it if you feel ready. Sometimes telling the story eases the weight. Weeks passed. The silence between my sister and me grew wider, heavier. I missed her laughter, the way we used to talk late into the night when we were girls. Now her absence felt like a wound that would not close. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the folder still in the drawer. I thought of burning it, thought of erasing the trail completely, as if undoing it might bring her back to me. But the truth does not vanish in flames. It lingers in the lives saved, in the choices made. So I left it there untouched. Then one Sunday afternoon, something shifted. I was walking along the coast, the sky a pale gray, the air heavy with salt. My niece ran ahead, her small shoes kicking pebbles across the path. My sister walked a few steps behind, quiet, distant. It was the first time she had agreed to see me since everything collapsed. I expected silence. I expected her to shield her daughter from me. Instead, as the waves crashed against the rocks, my niece slipped her hand into mine. Her fingers were warm, small, steady. She looked up at me with those clear eyes children have, unburdened by politics or betrayal. Her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any accusation. "Mom says you broke everything," she whispered. Then she paused, her grip tightening. "But I think you just hear better than everyone else." I stopped walking. The world tilted. For a moment I could not breathe. Her words hung in the air like a lantern in the dark, simple and unshakable. I knelt down, brushing her hair from her face. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged in that way children do when they know more than they should. "You don't talk a lot, but you listen, and sometimes listening is louder than shouting." Tears burned my eyes, though I blinked them back, because in that moment she gave me something no one else could. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but recognition. Proof that even if the world saw me as a traitor, someone saw me clearly. Her words became my anchor. Have you ever had someone say something so simple, yet it saved you? I wonder what those moments are for you. If you are willing, share them. You never know who else needs to hear that reminder right now. Her words stayed with me long after that walk by the coast. At night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I heard them again. "You don't talk a lot, but you listen. And sometimes listening is louder than shouting." It struck me that she had seen what no one else could. In a family blinded by anger and betrayal, a child had noticed the truth. Children see clearly because they do not yet carry the weight of expectations or pride. They see the world as it is, not as they want it to be. I found myself replaying the moment, holding her words like a medal I had never received. They were not flashy, not gold or silver, but they were pure. For the first time since I handed that folder over, I felt something close to peace. Of course, the cost did not vanish. My sister still looked at me with eyes that carried both love and fury. At family gatherings, the air remained heavy, conversations stiff. Some relatives still whispered the word traitor when they thought I could not hear. But the weight of their judgment no longer crushed me. I had my anchor. I had my niece's hand in mine, small and strong, a reminder that listening is its own kind of courage. If you are listening to me now, think about the people in your life who truly see you. Not the mask you wear, not the role others expect, but the quiet truth inside. Who are they? And have you told them what it means to be seen? If you feel comfortable, share it in the comments. Maybe your story will remind someone else that they are not invisible. In the weeks that followed, I began to see my choice differently. At first, it felt like destruction, like I had shattered everything good in our family. But slowly, I began to understand that sometimes breaking is the only way to rebuild. My sister might never forgive me, but her daughter would grow up knowing that truth mattered, that silence could be a shield but never an excuse. That thought steadied me. It reminded me of the boy with freckles, of the letter from his mother, of every soldier who stood waiting for shipments that might or might not come. Perhaps they would never know my name, but they would live. And that, I realized, was enough. I often think of my years in uniform, the countless missions where I stood unseen in the corner of a room, listening while others spoke. I never needed the spotlight, I never needed applause. What I needed was to know that my silence saved lives, that when I chose to speak, it mattered. This was no different. The world would not remember me as a hero. My family might remember me as the one who tore them apart. But somewhere, lives continued because I chose the harder path. And in the end, that is what service always meant. Sacrificing comfort, reputation, sometimes even love for the sake of something larger. If you are hearing this, maybe you carry a burden of your own. Maybe you have made a choice that cost you more than you thought you could bear. Let me tell you this. You are not alone. The cost does not erase the worth. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like standing alone in the wreckage. But silence can be its own kind of strength, and truth, even when it cuts, can also heal. One evening, weeks later, I walked again along the coast with my niece. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the waves rolling steady against the shore. She pointed up at the clouds and said they looked like wolves. I smiled, remembering her words from before. Wolves don't always howl. Sometimes they just watch and protect. I realized then that this was who I was. Not the sister who failed, not the traitor they whispered about. I was the quiet watcher, the one who listened, the one who chose to protect even when it cost me everything. And in her small hand, in her quiet voice, I found something worth holding on to. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but recognition. A reminder that silence, when chosen with care, is not weakness. It is a scalpel. Sharp, intentional, able to cut through lies when the world refuses to see them. That is what I want you to remember as this story ends. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not shout the loudest or fight the hardest. Sometimes it is choosing to stand in silence until the moment comes when your voice can save lives. So as you leave me now, I ask you one last thing. Think about your own life. Where have you chosen silence? Was it fear or was it strength? And if it was strength, did it save something worth saving? Share if you feel ready. Your story may be the anchor for someone else, the way my niece's words became mine. Because in the end, the truth always comes at a price. But the price of silence, when it costs lives, is always higher. And sometimes, all it takes is listening better than anyone else to make the choice that changes everything. In the quiet after everything, I found myself walking the shoreline again. The waves were steady, rolling one after another, as if they had carried secrets for centuries and never grown tired. My niece walked beside me, her small hand wrapped around mine, the salt air tangling her hair into soft curls. For once, the silence between us did not feel heavy. It felt like a language we both understood. I had lost much. My sister's trust, the warmth of family dinners that once gave me comfort, the illusion of belonging. Yet I had gained something too, a clarity I could not ignore, the strength to accept that the right path is often the loneliest. The world teaches us to measure power in noise, in shouted orders, in clashing weapons, in applause that fills a room. But I had learned that true strength is quieter. It lives in the choice to walk into the storm even when no one walks with you. It lives in the decision to carry the truth even when it cuts you open. Standing at the edge of the sea, I understood what service had always meant. It was never about medals or promotions or the way others clapped you on the back. It was about lives. About protecting what could not protect itself. About making choices no one else wanted to make and living with the weight of them. My niece tugged at my hand, pointing to the horizon where the sun dipped into the water. The sky was streaked with crimson and gold, the kind of beauty that asks nothing of you except to witness it. I watched her face glow in that light, her eyes wide, unscarred by the things I had seen. And I thought, this is why. This is why I did it, so children like her could grow up in a world where truth still mattered. The waves whispered at our feet, curling foam around our shoes, retreating only to return. They reminded me that silence too has a rhythm. It can wound when it hides corruption, but it can heal when it carries wisdom. My silence had once been mistaken for weakness. Now I knew it was a kind of power. A scalpel, a shield, a language of its own. I will not pretend the choice was easy. Loyalty to justice meant betrayal of blood. That truth still aches in my chest, but honor is not measured in comfort. It is measured in the lives spared because you refuse to turn away. To anyone listening, hear me when I say this. You may lose when you stand for what is right. You may lose love, comfort, even family. But you will keep something that no one can take from you. Your own reflection in the mirror. The knowledge that you did not stay silent when silence would have cost lives. Strength does not always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like a woman walking the shoreline with a child's hand in hers, waves crashing like applause only the ocean can give. Sometimes it looks like listening more deeply than anyone else and finding the courage to speak when it matters most. If this story spoke to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. We bring stories like this every week, stories of courage and resilience, of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. And I would love to know where you are listening from tonight. Leave a comment with your city, your hour, your story. These connections remind us that no matter how far apart we are never truly alone. The sun slipped lower, the horizon swallowing it whole. My niece squeezed my hand tighter. The waves kept whispering, steady and sure. And I knew then that silence, when chosen with courage, could be as powerful as any voice. That was my lesson. That was my truth.